Thanks, Cara. It's a long time actually since I've come to a CIFA conference to talk about our HLF and EPIC programs. It used to be a regular feature a long time ago, and I hope this won't be too self-indulgent a moment of reflection. But it seemed when Cara and I were talking about running this session and proposing it for the conference, it seemed a good time to sort of stop and reflect and think about some of the previous training initiatives that we've been involved in. And it's 10 years since the end of the HLF programme that we worked on. It started in 2006 and was extended. It was initially a 4-year programme, and it was extended twice to try and combat some of the challenges around the recession and retaining skills in the sector and supporting organisations to recruit and to maintain their skills training programmes in the face of financial challenges. We had really hoped to get somebody from what is now the National Lottery Heritage Fund, whose acronym I can never actually pronounce, to come and talk about from their perspective, their investment. And unfortunately, we weren't able to the dates didn't work to do that. There is a lot of evaluation data, I think, from those various investments that organisations like the Lottery Fund have made in skills training that really could be mined for more data to support that longer term evaluation of the impact of some of these schemes. But just to start then, going back to the early 2000s, really, and actually when I first started working for the Institute, so I think in between me being interviewed and appointed to my role back in 2005, the IFA, as it was, we've all changed our acronyms, had won a development grant from the HLF to develop a project looking at skills training. And the background to that was a long-running objective within the Institute to document archaeological skills, which led to the creation of the National Occupational Standards, identify skills gaps and develop training and qualifications to meet them as part of a process of trying to formalise the structure for providing archaeological skills, recognising that the predominantly graduate entry profession that we were at the time, that those graduate routes weren't necessarily able or designed to or should have been providing the practical skills that archaeologists need. So that was the context, and that has continued as a long-running objective. It's been reformulated and reworded several times along the way, but it's still one of CIFA's longer-running programs of work. So the objectives of the workplace training scheme, I think it was called, it was the predecessor to Skills for the Future, was all around capacity building, providing workplace learning opportunities to meet specific skills needs. So there was an element of trying to identify specific areas of archaeological skill that were missing or in short supply, thinking in some ways around some of the more specialist roles, but also capacity building in the sense of developing a methodology and a structure supported by tools and resources so that employers could structure their own training. So the idea wasn't to, in the long term, fund employers to take on trainees. It was to help them build that capacity. The bursary programme, the project that we were successful in getting funding for, aimed to meet defined skills need. These were the measures that the overall overarching measures that we were evaluated against. Providing innovative training and encouraging diversity, enabling heritage organisations to work in partnership and developing and disseminating practice. And some of that happened through the structure that allowed the bids to be developed. So we worked with all kinds of different heritage-related organisations to develop the methodology that led to the successful programme. At the same time, Historic England, English Heritage, the acronym change, had been running its own in-house specialist skills programme and had developed a methodology for around a zoo archaeology placement, I think it was, that Jill Campbell and others at Fort Cumberland had developed, which they called the EPIC programme, and I think it was English Professional Placements in Conservation. I think as with all great acronyms, the acronym was more important than what it actually meant. But the EPIC programme had been running in-house with Historic England, and there was an opportunity to learn from the methodology developed there. So that initial format for a training placement was something that we were able to bring into the HLF scheme. And shortly after that, English Heritage as well outsourced the running of the EPIC programme, so they to us, so they ran in parallel with the HLF programme. They were all supported secondments, so CIFA employed the trainees. We were funded initially to fund 100% of their wages as trainees on the programme, and we later tapered that so that with increasing employer contributions. EPIC was focused very much on specialist skills that were identified as being in short supply. So things, and particularly skills that were perceived as being not exclusive to the Heritage Agency specifically, but very much embedded within the Heritage Agency and getting those out into more commercial practice. So looking at skills like zoo archaeology, bioarchaeology, there were placements in architectural investigation, landscape survey, pottery analysis, and probably some others that I've forgotten now. And the objectives, again, were very similar, but probably more focused on trying to create the mechanisms whereby employers could invest in developing their own specialist training programs. And I'll come back to sort of touch on how successful that was or wasn't a little bit later on. Obviously, with huge amounts of lottery funding, we had some range of targets that we needed to meet that sat below the overarching objectives of the project, and this is from the evaluation report that we wrote at the end of the project, which sums up how successful we were in meeting those targets. And these were targets we'd set ourselves. They were reasonably ambitious, I think realistically ambitious. In some cases, we were able to meet them. In other cases, we really didn't make very much progress at all. And chiefly, that was around diversity. And I mean, we would probably change the language we use to express those targets now. We would probably reframe them. But that's directly from the report that we published at the end of the project. So we weren't successful in attracting a wider ethnic diversity into archaeology through the placements, and it was always hard to see how the mechanism for that could have worked, because we were constrained by the nature of the programme to attract people who had already made a decision to become archaeologists. We didn't have the opportunity to go out to talk to schools, for example, or offer taster placements, which is something that we were quite keen to do, that might encourage people who'd not really thought about archaeology, didn't realise that you could be an archaeologist, to come and engage and think about that. So I think we would think about that very differently now if we were running that again. The other thing that disappointingly we weren't very successful in is attracting the graduates from those training programs into CIFA accreditation. We didn't meet our targets on that, and there seemed to be a barrier there in terms of they were so successful in getting jobs, they were so well trained at the end of these programs, that they didn't immediately see a career benefit to them of being professionally accredited. And that was an interesting outcome, I think, that we probably hadn't foreseen. I suppose we probably quite naively imagined that contact with CIFA over the course of the placement and that engagement with us would have filled them with, inspiration about the need for professional accreditation. So again, a little bit more integration and work there probably would have helped with that one. The other targets that we did meet, we were able to develop our capacity to offer MVQ assessments, which we wouldn't have been able to do without the scheme. The fact that we had funding to cover the assessment fees for all of the trainees who wanted to go through the MVQ process and gain that qualification meant that we could train assessors. We had the funding and the financial security in that environment to really upskill in terms of developing CIFA's capacity to deliver qualifications. And we'll come on to the legacy of that in a bit. The other thing, which again, I mean, it's the interesting thing, and I think it's something that will be useful to perhaps discuss when we're talking about how we evaluate the success or otherwise of some of these initiatives, is how you define that and over what time period, because we're reviewing this now 10 years after the end of the scheme. The evaluation report was written. I can't remember the deadline now, but it would have been submitted within a matter of weeks, maybe a month or so after the end of the programme, and trying to assess and evaluate the impact of something which is actually about changing people's behaviours, shifting sector capacity and sector thinking to a new model, actually needs to be evaluated over a much longer time frame, I think. So those were the detailed targets that we set ourselves. But just thinking about those broader objectives and whether the schemes were successful in doing that, they did build capacity. We have archaeologists, there will be delegates amongst us, probably many, who came through those programmes and have gone on to pursue careers and to stay in the sector and are now in increasingly senior roles. It's interesting. I'm not allowed to watch Digging for Britain at home because I really annoy my husband by jumping up and down every now and then going, I assessed his MVQ, which is quite irritating. But it's been brilliant to see those people thrive within the sector. And that's not to say that they wouldn't have made careers without the training programmes, but the investment and the structure that sat around those training programmes that they were able to benefit for, I think, supported a much earlier progression and career support than perhaps would otherwise have been the case. Did we meet specific sector skills needs? Yes, in the sense that in a very small sector with some very niche and specialist areas, you maybe only ever need specialists in single figures in some of the areas that we were training were so niche. So I think we did do that. It was successful. I don't think it was successful in creating an environment that enabled the nurturing of specialists across all sorts of organisations. There were particular issues around that, and particularly with the more specialist areas about capacity to deliver and support organisations to sort of grow their in-house specialists, and that's still an issue that we need to think more about, I think. The other thing was, as I say, the idea that particularly with the EPIC placements, that we would take skills that were kind of seen as being inherent within English heritage at the time and move them out into commercial practice. We had a lot of placements that were focused on sort of analytical landscape survey, earthwork survey, and the aim was to promote that as a technique, to be a more prominently used technique in developer-funded evaluation, and that didn't work. Most of those graduates from those placements ended up being consultants, which is really interesting. There's something interesting there that I need to go away and think about at some point about the skill set that they learnt in undertaking those earthwork surveys that then made them very good consultants later on. So partially successful in that first objective. The capacity building objective, I think, is arguably far more successful. Developing the methodology and the tools to support employers. There are so many of the structures now, and it's always interesting to reflect because change is slow. There isn't a moment running programs like this where you said everybody suddenly says, "Oh, right, okay, that's how we should be doing it. Let's all do that from now on." It doesn't work like that. So it's a slow change, and one of the unexpected legacies, in a way, from these training programs is the number of archaeologists who graduated from those programs, who went on to set up training programs in their own organisations, and who now we're coming across supervising and mentoring apprentices, or getting involved in placement schemes, or their own creating in-house employer training programs, and having benefited themselves from that structured environment with that real investment. It was the investment in their professional skills, I think, that really made the difference. Not the technical stuff, but that how to operate in a professional environment, the ethics, but also the sort of more business awareness, more awareness of context and frameworks and policy that really supported them to succeed. And they've gone on to replicate that, which has been a really interesting. We didn't set targets for that, and we couldn't have evaluated them because these are things that we're seeing 10 years down the line. But it would be interesting to think about what the framework for that kind of long-term evaluation might be. But just back to CIFA's long-term vision and objectives for a moment, the challenge has been around making sure that we have enough skilled archaeologists to deliver public benefit. And actually that's starting to evolve with another strand about this idea of creating sustainable careers and equitable careers. So not just about bringing new people into the industry, but how do we make them want to stay if we're going to bring people in from a more diverse range of backgrounds? How do we keep them and support them once they're here? And the opportunities that challenge created to really think differently about how we train and upskill and provide professional development for our workforce. And I think that's where a lot of the success of those programs have come from, because we wouldn't be offering apprenticeships now if we hadn't had the EPIC program and the HLF program. We wouldn't have known where to start. We wouldn't have had the tools, the assessment capabilities, the fact that we've been able to go on and become an endpoint assessment organisation and go through the off-qual recognition process, which is painful. I've got the scars. None of that would have happened if we hadn't had those programs and that investment from English Heritage as was, and from the Lottery Fund. And it has spawned so many of these CIFA initiatives as we've been able to take that thinking and evolve it and move it forward. So it's informed the partnership with University Archaeology UK to develop accredited degree programmes. It's spawned the CIFA approval process for employer training schemes that allowed us, using that structure of national occupational standards, to support employers to develop their own training programs. It's supported the apprenticeships, and the MVQ assessment centre is still going. Very small numbers of MVQ candidates at the moment, but it's having that capacity within CIFA has really kept that going. And there are people benefiting who want to use a flexible route into the sector, or to gaining archaeological skills that isn't as sort of time bound as the apprenticeship programme. It's allowed us to develop our new lovely new branded CIFA qualifications, CIFA-Q assessment centre, and Amanda's out on the stall with all her nice leaflets and all the rest of it. None of that would have happened, I don't think, without that level of investment. And it's going from strength to strength. I put this slide up. I think it comes from our annual report last year, but it's out of date already. If your eyesight's anything as bad as mine, you won't be able to read the numbers from the back anyway, so it doesn't matter. But we're in double figures in a lot of those areas now. So all of these schemes are moving forward and developing and starting to actually change, I think, the way that we think about training. And that sits within that wider career development framework. So I don't want to just think about how we bring people into archaeology, but actually how we upskill them. And that was always an element of the EPIC and HLF schemes, and it is still with the apprenticeship and employer training programs that we support now. It's not just about entry level, but about upskilling existing archaeologists, whether that's to do a level 7 degree apprenticeship, master's level apprenticeship, or whether it's a program of skills development, taking people from field work into post-excavation or whatever that might be. That flexibility of routes to support career development. There are some things that probably in terms of embedding that legacy of those programs that were missing from our thinking, I think, when we were coming to the end of the funded programs. And one of those were around the support that archaeological organisations need, that employers need to understand the business benefits, what it's going to do for their company, and what difference that might make. And it's great now that we've got colleges involved who can actually, help talk employers through the process and engage with them on the apprenticeship front. There has been a real capacity issue around training providers and their skills and capacity to deliver the training. It's notable that the training providers that we have on the apprenticeship scheme have all had some investment in archaeology previously. So they either offered the archaeology A-level if they were further education colleges, or it just so happens that the principal of Cirencester College and the apprenticeships manager at University of Wales Trinity St David's are archaeologists. It's but because they are archaeologists who've moved sideways into positions, they've really grasped this opportunity and taken it forward. But training providers need to see demand. And going back to Kevin Costner and the Field of Dreams, you can't just build it and wait for people to turn up. You have to have that support network there. And no further education college is going to invest in a training program if it can't see its market. It needs to see the employers there. Employers aren't going to engage until they can see that as a training provider, you're not going to commit your incredibly precious time to developing these schemes till you know that they're actually going to happen. There's a mechanism for that. So actually bringing those different elements together is equally in need of investment, and I think that's something we didn't think about when the lottery fund were giving us lots of money to do all of this stuff. And the other thing, and this is an area that really needs development and needs thinking about, is the advice and the support for different demographics coming into the sector. So what are the needs of different trainees and how are they supported in the workplace? And particularly when we're looking at recruiting from different ethnic backgrounds and different social backgrounds, how challenging is it and intimidating is it to come into an environment where there's nobody else who's come from an alternative route? If you're the only apprentice in the organisation, everybody else is a graduate or postgraduate, has got doctorates coming out their ears. How are we going to support those people to feel that this is their profession as well, and there's a place for them and they're supported and nurtured in that? And a lot of us involved in these conversations have come through a very similar route as graduates. So how do we understand those experiences? And we may not be the best people to support them, but there are organisations and agencies that we can work with who do understand how to do that properly. And I think it's probably debatable whether which is worse, no support or badly delivered support in actually keeping people and making them feel safe and secure and supported in the workplace. So I think that is probably brings me to all I wanted to say, really. Other than this is from our strategic plan, it's the end goal that a larger, more diverse and inclusive profession will offer a wide range of expertise and better reflect its relevance to society. And I think that touches on the social value ideas that Sadie and Caroline and others were talking about this morning, and as Pete was saying about working in the public interest, that actually we have specific skills needs. We need to make sure that we've got a sustainable profession, that we can meet the demands of clients, that we have enough archaeologists with the right skills. But actually, at the end of it all, it's about delivering that relevance to society, because if we can't do that, we aren't supported anymore. And I think trying to work out an evaluation framework, and again, there are organisations that can help us with this. We don't need to try and reinvent our own archaeological evaluation strategy. There are organisations looking at this that we can partner with, but actually developing those long-term evaluation frameworks is something I'm very mindful with the apprenticeships, that we need to start making sure we're collecting that data now about who's applying for them, who's getting them, who's successfully completing their assessment and carrying on in the sector, so that we can actually see whether we've made a difference, whether that route has made a difference to the sorts of people who get to be archaeologists. And thinking about that now, rather than in 10 years' time, when probably not me, but somebody else, Cara and other colleagues, are standing up here reflecting and evaluating what we're doing now, that we're not still saying, oh, I wish we'd collected that data and I wish we'd thought about that 10 years ago. But it is a challenge to design those long-term strategies in funding environments that are of necessity quite short-term. So no answers, I'm afraid, but just posing a question, which I'm hoping you will have some thoughts on when we get to the discussion session. Thank you.